This is a Full and Bloom interview with producer-engineer Beau Hill. Inside the album, Warrant, Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich. More info at fullandbloom.com. How does Warrant come into your life?
I got a call from their manager, Eddie Wenrick, and I was still living in New York at the time. I was working on a Rat record. I don't remember which one.
Probably like Reach for the Sky, I think, right?
No. That was much later. Well, anyway, I was in L.A. working on something. I forget what. And Eddie called my lawyer, and my lawyer called me and said, hey, you want to go have a meeting with Eddie Wenrick? And he was working at Tom Hewlett Management at the time. So Eddie and I really hit it off, and so he said, hey, let's go. We come out and see the band. And so they were playing a place in L.A. at the time. I believe it was called the Country Club. And I said, sure. And so similarly to Rat, I come to this nightclub, and there's like 2,000 kids going completely batshit crazy over Warrant. And I'm watching, they played Heaven, and I'm watching girls in the audience sing the words and things like that to a band that has no record out. So I thought, okay, well, this is kind of a no-brainer. So they've got a pretty committed following. And so I said, sure.
What was your first impression of their sound?
I thought Jani was an absolute star right off the bat. He was like a cross between Elvis Presley meets a Southern Baptist minister. That's kind of how he struck me. He was really, really great with the audience, and you could just tell. I mean, his personality was just, he was like a type A, alpha kind of guy, and he sang great, and he sounded really good, put on a hell of a show, and I just, that was really kind of a no-brainer for me. I thought this kid is really, really exceptional.
Where did you guys go in to record Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I want to say, I think we did it at the Village in L.A.
It says on Wikipedia that it was Enterprise.
Well,
it didn't say it in the usual spot. It kind of said it further down the page.
Okay, then that's probably correct. It probably was Enterprise.
Okay. And which is the same place you recorded the horns on Rat's Reach for the Sky, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think we did all of Reach for the Sky at Enterprise. And we did, I guess that would have meant we did both records for Warrant at Enterprise as well.
What was it that you liked about that studio?
They had a large control room, which for the way that I work with most people in the control room with me, I really liked. But they had a storage area right above the control room. And it was just basically a big concrete box, and they would store old outboard gear and stuff like that. And so I asked them if they would build me some tie lines so that I could cut my drums up there in that really nice live room, and they did. And so I started working there. I had a tendency in my career, if I liked a particular studio, that I just book it by the year. And that was the case there at Enterprise. I mean, I can't even tell you how many records there.
Wow. So you would actually book it for a whole year?
Yeah. And then I would give it, if I knew I was going to take a month off, I'd go and I'd say, okay, you guys can book it for September or whatever.
But you just wanted to make sure it was blocked out just for your use. I guess you had
I had it blocked out for a year.
Yeah, you had so much going on. You had Warrant, and Winger was kind of happening around then.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Rat even was still going on.
Yeah, I had it like 3 years, something like that. We did a lot of records there. But I did the same thing at Atlantic Studio B in New York because I was working there so much. I just said, look, just pencil me in for the whole year. And they did. Are
you not associated with Atlantic anymore, or are you with Columbia, or how is that working?
I am. I'm an independent.
Okay.
And I have never actually worked for Atlantic. I mean, as far as being on their staff goes, the only that I ever actually worked for was Interscope.
Okay, which you started with Jimmy Iovine.
Yeah.
Would it work like where you had contracts? You signed a contract with, say, Atlantic to do 3 records, or did you even do that?
No, it was on a one-on-one basis. I got on really, really famously with the folks at Atlantic. And, after a certain point, Doug Morris just it was like, what would you like to do? And we'll make it happen. That's kind of why I wound up doing so much work for Atlantic. I mean, a lot of people thought I was under contract to them. wasn't legally under contract to them, but they gave me so much work that, some other record companies, they wouldn't even try to hire me because it was like, yeah, well, he's going to be doing so-and-so for Atlantic.
Yeah, because Winger was even on Atlantic, right?
Winger was on Atlantic.
Do you recall what the budget was for that record for Warrant?
I think that one was around 200.
Wow.
If memory serves correct, I think it was around 200.
That was the go-in budget, or is that, now I know that album got dragged out a little bit, right?
Actually, let me revise that. 200 was for Cherry Pie. And I want to say 150, 125, something like that for Dirty Rotten.
Was that a pretty standard budget for a debut release at that time in 88 or 89?
I think kind of, yes.
Okay.
Pardon me, I'm choking. I'm sure that there were exceptions to that. I believe Steve Stevens' record with Warner Brothers was, but he was Billy Idol's guitar player. He was established, so it wasn't like he was a baby band or anything, but he got a very, very nice deal, is my understanding. But I think Warrant was, more typical budget-wise.
What were the dynamics within Warrant?
My impression is that those guys liked each other, and there wasn't the conflict over the writing, because the guys in the band, to their credit, were smart enough to know that Jani was a really, really exceptionally gifted writer. Whether you like the stuff or not, he really knew how to craft a song, and he knew how to craft a melody, and he was a better than average lyricist, in my opinion.
I know you recorded a Twisted Sister record as well, but I remember asking Tom Werman about this when he did Stay Hungry. It's confusing to me when it's like you got guys who play instruments and play guitar, play bass, and nobody else comes in with like a riff, like, hey, check out this riff to a song, or because it's the same thing in like Twisted Sister where Dee Snider wrote all the lyrics and music, and then same thing with this where Jani Lane wrote everything.
There were some shared songwriting credits. I mean, I've got some songwriting credits on the Warrant stuff.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, and the way that worked, just so that you'll know, is with my job as producer, I never went into a project going, okay, I'm going to write these songs so that I can scoop up some publishing. My attitude was that I need to do everything I can to make the songs as good as I can. And if that means me sitting down, putting pen to paper, and then hand it to the band saying, what do you think? If it passed scrutiny, then great. And my attitude with those guys was I kind of gave songwriting credit like you give a tip to a waiter. So it was like, whatever you think it's worth. And so Jani was very generous, or I guess Jani and the whole band was very generous. But that was my protocol, because I didn't want people to think that I was changing their material just so that I could ingratiate myself to some publishing money. So the best way for me to do that was just take that financial piece of it out of the equation.
And Jani was not only the main guy, he was also the kind of leader of the band, right?
Without question.
As far as his voice goes, he had a pretty powerful voice, correct?
He did. He was, he had a very powerful voice. His performances in the studio were, he was almost like a one-take guy. Yeah, I mean, he was really, really exceptional. And if you ever watch any of their live stuff, I mean, everybody hits a clinker every now and then when you're playing live, but he was, again, very exceptional in that. He had a good ear, and his pitch was, generally speaking, right on. Incredibly
gifted as well. I mean, he started, wasn't he also like a really good drummer?
Yes.
And did he play guitar?
Yeah. And one of the things that I really like about Jani's songwriting, and he really influenced me in this way, like you had mentioned, somebody comes in with a riff or something like that. Jani's attitude, at least to me, was, okay, if I can't get the song across with one vocal and me on acoustic guitar, then we don't have song. And I thought that, I went, wow, that's a really interesting way of looking at things. And so I found myself over the course of my career giving people acoustic guitars or say, look, sit down, play the chords and sing the song, and let's see what happens. Because we can always go back in and dress it up, put a riff over it, or, put a keyboard in there or add harmonies. But when you strip it down to its most basic level, which is like hootenanny style, sitting around the campfire and somebody picks up a guitar and starts strumming. So if you were going to do, pick Michelle by the Beatles, right? Anybody could sit down if they learned the chords to that, and they could sing and play in front of the campfire, and everybody would go, wow, what a smash. And that was kind of Jani's bottom line was, yeah, I'm going to render it on the acoustic guitar, and if it holds up, it holds up. Then we're good. Then we can arrange it and rock and roll it and do whatever we're going to do. But the basic structure and the architecture of the song are holding up.
I'm just curious, do you think you could have done that with Rat?
I don't think so. Their whole approach was different. The riffs that Warren would come up with were quite exceptional, and because of the way that Stephen and I worked together, there wasn't any let's sit around the campfire and listen to Warren play riffs and try to get Stephen to sing a song over it. It just never happened to work that way. But Jani this was his natural way of doing it, and I went, okay, great, let's go.
Did you record Jani's vocals any different than, say, how you recorded Stephen Pearcy's? I know you had kind of a formula where you would make them run through it a few times.
Well, the way that Stephen's voice came out was I knew exactly what to do to make his voice sound that way. With Jani, it was just beat the previous take, and like I told you before, I'd get 3 takes, start to finish, and then the next morning I would come up and do the vocal comp before the band showed up, stealing the best from the 3 performances and creating one bionic performance, let's just call it. And then I'd play it to Jani, and I'd say, so what do you think? And he said, nah, I can beat it. Okay, great. So we'd keep that one, and then he'd go in and do 3 more. And then I'd just continue that process until everybody sat around and nodded their head and said, yeah, that's the one. And that's kind of how we did it. So I was always keeping the best performance and the best work from the previous day until we beat it. Similarly to the way we would cut rhythm section tracks. Keep one, try and beat it.
As far as his voice holding up, was he kind of a workhorse and could do it all day?
He was. Yeah, he was. He was a workhorse. And and as I remember, he always came in really prepared. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. And he was also good if I said, okay, that's great, let's try this. And I maybe hum him an idea. He'd go, okay. And when it got really good was when he would sing something, I would make a suggestion, and in trying to implement my suggestion, he came up with something even better. That was the sweet spot of working with Jani, because it was both of us kind of pushing each other to take it up to the next notch. And with great frequency, he would take a germ idea that I would give him, and he would render it back to me only 10 times better than the idea I came up with in the first place.
And you did quite a bit of backing vocals like you did on Rat, correct?
Yeah.
And you guys would harmonize and do stuff like that, or how did that work?
I don't really remember. I don't believe that there was any controversy around any of that kind of stuff. And a lot of stuff Jani and I we did together, because the idea is, if you think about it like a classical orchestra, if you have 3 violins playing the exact same part, it's going to sound somewhat different. So if you have 3 guys singing the exact same line, you're actually kind of creating that 4th mystery composite voice.
Of course.
If that makes any sense at all.
Sure. Yeah. I wouldn't think there would be any controversy. I just assumed when I read it online, that's just part of your production at this point. Or I almost looked at it as like how you did the Rat guys, where you just did stuff when they weren't around. I just looked at it as that's your production. That's part of the bonus of getting you as a producer.
Well, yeah, and sometimes it was easier if I heard something. Sometimes it was just easier if I just went in and did it myself, rather than me walk somebody else through it, just for the mechanics of getting it on tape. And sometimes Jani would have all the background parts that he wanted written. He knew what he wanted to do anyway, and so I went, okay, great, let's go. By contrast, the Warrant guys were very easy to work with, as opposed to on occasions with the Rat guys. And we had some controversial issues, around the guitar players and all that. swirling around.
Of course, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, that's coming up. I'll bring that up in a minute. But I'd also think by this point, I mean, you're an incredibly established and successful producer. The Rat guys, I think, got used to it because you guys both kind of launch your careers at the same time. So that's always going to breed some contempt.
To put it mildly.
At this point, I mean, you're coming in and got a slew of platinum records under your belt, and I would think there wouldn't be any controversy with really anybody at that point on, right?
No. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the success that I'd had previously to working with Warrant certainly was a modifying factor if anybody had any difficulties with things, because at that point, it's like, look, the guy sold some records with Rat and sold some records with so-and-so and so-and-so. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt. That's why we hired him. And with Rat, to be fair, it was more I was thrust upon them, courtesy of Doug Morris. So it was a different vibe. I'll definitely grant you that.
Now, it's also during these sessions that Jani had walked in on his girlfriend and she was banging one of his friends. And it looked like you guys had actually started recording the album in April '88. And then it's not even released until the tail end of '89. I mean, like the last day. So right at really 1990. And supposedly he had like a mental breakdown. I mean, do you recall anything about that?
Well, I remember that's where I Saw Red came from.
Right, which was on the next album.
Yeah. And I don't, you could be right, but I don't remember any long delays like that between releases, because that would have meant that Dirty Rotten would have been out there for over a year without any new material. So I'm not sure about that particular timeline. I mean, you could be right. For some reason, that doesn't ring true.
Maybe that drama happened after the recording then. I just wondered if it was in the studio. It did say April of '88 is when you guys started, and then maybe completed in November. And then it's like a whole year before it actually comes out.
No, I can tell you for sure that's not correct.
Okay.
And for which record was this?
This was Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich, which is when he finds out or walks in on his girlfriend, it said. Of course, he does the song for the next album, but it said that there was some kind of mental breakdown and that the record company had delayed the release so he could go in and get some treatment.
That's very intriguing. If that happened at the beginning of Dirty Rotten, then there's a high degree of probability that I was not close enough to the band at that time that they would share that with me, especially if the record was being delayed because Jani was having a breakdown or something like that. So that's why my memory is not clear on that. But subsequently after I Saw Red came around, I got the idea. Okay, something happened that was none too pleasant for him, and but what a tremendous song came out of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least he made a lot of money off of it.
Yeah, he did, but that was the beauty of him as a writer, because he could, number one, he could share something that was that deeply personal, and he could write about it in a way that, I mean, who couldn't relate to that song? I mean, everybody's had their heart broken somewhere along the line. I mean, I know it got to me emotional. I was just like, wow, where did that come from? And that was one of the beauties of Jani, was he had the ability to do that.
Would you characterize him as having been quite fragile?
Jani certainly had his demons, comparatively speaking, not to the extent of Robin necessarily, but yeah, I mean, he juggled with a lot of different issues, and especially, after the second record, that was during the time, or actually, I guess it would have been during their third record, that, Jani's left the band, Jani's back in the band, Jani wants to be a bass player, Jani's back in the band, but I was at Interscope, and so other than peripherally, keeping in touch with people and people calling me and saying, oh, guess what's happening with Warrant this week? And I go, what? Oh, Jani quit again. Oh, wow, that sucks. But during the records that I did with them, I don't remember him as being that unhinged. We would certainly go out and have that one extra vodka tonic or that one extra cup of sake that we probably shouldn't have had. But nothing that really stands out to me as psychotic or psychopathic behavior from him.
His deal was more alcohol. I don't remember him being really involved with drugs.
Yeah, that's the way that I understand it until later, and then he started mixing his favorite drink, I think it was probably wine at that point with some sort of pharmaceutical, and we all know how that ended.
Did you hear that Bobby Brown story where she came out and said that he had been raped or whatever? Did you hear that recently?
I did not.
So it's some kind of story where she said, like, prior to them making it, he was raped by some famous heavy metal singer and the singer's manager.
Wow.
Said that he was kind of drugged or something, and then they went to town on him.
I don't remember hearing that story. God, when you mentioned Bobby Brown, I had completely forgotten that his wedding to her, it was a beautiful ceremony, and they were like the perfect couple to me for however long that lasted. But interesting time.
What do you remember about that?
Well, it was on the rooftop of this beautiful hotel, and it begins with a B, and I just don't remember. I used to stay there all the time. Beautiful swimming pool up there, and Jani rented out the whole upper deck of this hotel, and it was quite nice as I remember. It was a beautiful day, and everybody kind of behaved themselves, and we all got through it. So
I thought this was a trippy story on the single Heaven, that the album was released, and then I guess it had some success or something, and then they made you guys not just go and remix it, but that the song was actually re-recorded.
Well, that's possible. I don't have any burning memory of that.
I just thought that was a trip. Why wouldn't they just remix it? It said online, at least, that it was re-recorded to have a bigger sound.
I don't remember, honestly, because Heaven was on Dirty Rotten, right?
Correct.
Well, if something like that would have happened, then we had some sort of provision in my contract, remixing and re-whatevers, that I got first crack at it, and I don't remember recording that song twice. It's possible that could be the case, and I'm just not remembering because I don't remember. And
you don't remember remixing it either?
Remixing it could have been, yeah, that's very possible.
Yeah, it seems strange to go and re-record the whole thing. It seemed like if they wanted more cheese to it, like more reverb or whatever, make the snare sound like it was exploding or something, I thought that would just be done in the mix.
Well, that wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, because for a baby band like that, and especially since I wasn't on Atlantic, I was on Columbia, Sony, I didn't have the free reign to extend the budget if I wanted to. So that could have been one of those things where we just did the best that we could under the budget that we could. And then when the record started selling and somebody's decided they were going to release Heaven as a single, that they would say, okay, Beau, go back in and remix it because we want it to be more purple or more whatever in the hell they want. Right. Or we want the vocal louder for radio. God knows, any number of weird reasons why they'd want it.
Do you recall anything about recording that song or anything about that song?
Well, yeah, that was one of the songs that I saw all the girls singing, and they were, lighting their lighters and their arms swaying back and forth, and I was just astonished at that. But no, there wasn't any. I don't recall any drama around Heaven at all, because it was. And I don't think I did any rearrangement work on that. I think it was pretty much just the way the band did it.
Do you have any favorite moments from those sessions?
My overall remembrance is that the sessions were fun, kind of easy, and they were respectful. I guess that would be another word that would creep into the conversation. Did
you think that album would do as well as it did?
No, I didn't. But, when you're in process with things like that back in those days, if the A&R department and the marketing department start getting lathered up, then that's significant. And that happened with the Warrant guys. And so, in my experience, those were the two divisions of the record company that you really, really, really had to have in your corner if you hope to have major success. And they definitely had that.
Yeah, it was kind of a slow starter. I know you wouldn't be involved at that point. I remember they released 32 Pennies first.
Oh, right.
It's almost like the Poison story, where Poison released on that first album one single and it didn't really do anything, and then they released Talk Dirty to Me. So it's like then Warrant releases Down Boys, and I think it took off because it says it's released on January 31st, 1989. It doesn't go gold until July, and then August it's certified platinum. I mean, from there it starts really taking off, and then by January, double platinum.
Well, yeah. The other interesting leg to the stool, if you will, would have been MTV's role. So it's possible, to be honest, I don't remember if 32 Pennies even had a video, but that may have been the thing that really made it blow up to the extent that it did, was the involvement of MTV.
Yeah, I can't remember
Which was basically critical for every single group that I was doing back in those days. I mean, if you got Rick Krim and the MTV guys, then you're in.
Right.
So,
and then when you're out, you're out. It seemed like the bands would die off quick.
Well, and, Jani was a good-looking guy, and he was a really good performer. And I remember Down Boys, I mean, it really showed their true strengths, I thought.
So I've got to ask you about the guitars, because there was always the rumor that Eric and Joey didn't actually play on those records. What's the real story on that?
This is the true story. So we're in pre-production, and I'm listening. Eddie Wenrick, their manager, walks in the door, and I said, Eddie, I need to have a chat with you. And so we walked outside, and I said, look, we're in direct competition with the Van Halens and the DeMartinis of the universe, and Eric and Joey are just not at that level at this time. And I think that we're going to get smoked if we continue the way that we're continuing, and I'd like to bring in another guitar player to play the solos. So everybody took a big gulp, and so I called a band meeting, and to their credit, I know that they were very disappointed, but they were so professional, and they were so respectful that what could have been World War III didn't occur. They didn't like it, but the guy that I selected to do the guitar work is like one of the loveliest people you could ever meet. He has like zero ego, and wound up, as it turns out, giving guitar lessons to Eric and Joey and teaching them the solos that he played. His name's Mike Slamer. Very, very talented guy. And he's worked with me on several records, and I produced his second album with Streets, with Steve Walsh from Kansas. He was just a genius. I mean, everything that I could think of to say, hey, what about this? Boom, there it was. And his chops and his abilities on the guitar, as well as great arranger and great producer, actually, to his credit, because he really knew and he felt for the situation that I created in a rock band that didn't play their own solos. So a lot of sensitivity and a lot of encouragement and a lot of that kind of stuff was wrapped into this. So privately, I don't know if those guys held a grudge against me or if there was any problem about that. My recollection was that no, that didn't happen. And, we just kind of did it surgically as opposed to making it political and public and all that kind of stuff. Because at the end of the day, I wanted a fighting chance to get these guys out there and get them going. So it was a tough decision on my part, but that's kind of what producers have to do. You have to be able to take as good as you give. And as it turns out, I think I made the correct decision. And again, full credit to those guys, because they could have made it really difficult, and they did the exact opposite. I will always be very respectful of them as a band for giving me the leeway to make that tough decision.
What were some of the other projects that you brought him in on? Do you recall?
Yeah, he played on Fiona. He played on, obviously, on Streets. And I think I brought him in on Twisted Sister, too.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that I did, because we recorded that one in New York, and he was living in Jersey, so he would just take the train in. So, and I'm sure that there's probably a half a dozen more. Oh, he played on the Lost Boys soundtrack, and gosh, I'm sure I'll think of some more.
Were you dating Fiona?
Yeah.
Holy crap.
She's my first wife.
Oh my God, I had no idea. Wow.
You got to do your homework, brother.
God, no kidding. Holy shit. I knew you had produced, but then I looked online. I saw like a picture and you guys were walking next to each other. I was like, boy, it sure does look like they were dating. Man, she was gorgeous. Holy crap.
Yeah. And, hello?
Yeah. Oh, I was just seeing if you had anything else to say about that.
This is the first time I've ever stumped you.
She was just phenomenal. How long were you guys married?
We were together 10 years.
Did you ever have kids together?
No.
Okay. And so during all that time that you're cutting those, go ahead, sorry.
We were together 10 years, but we were only married for 1.
Should have never gotten married. That's what did it, huh?
Well, it was many factors, but no, we still are stay in touch, birthdays and Christmas, and every now and then she'll send me some pictures. Now, she got remarried and she has 2 kids. One, I think, is now going to Princeton. I know.
Amazing.
That's what happens when the clock keeps ticking.
So you're actually dating her the entire time you're cutting those Fiona records in the 80s? Yeah. Are you dating like in the very first time you work with her, or is it one of those romance stories where you date her on the first record?
The way that we met was one of the A&R guys at Atlantic, Jason Flom, had a song that I had written called Talk to Me. And Jason was Fiona's A&R guy, and he played her the song, and she loved it. So that was her first single on her first record, which I did not do. And because of the perceived success of that single, and I was, I'd already been a platinum producer at that point, Doug said, hey, why don't you do Fiona? And I went, okay. And so the first record we did was completely professional. There was no interaction at all. And then when we delivered the record that day, that night, I asked her if she'd join me for dinner.
You start dating from that point on?
Yeah.
Lucky you, man. She was probably one of the finest from that era. What is she doing nowadays?
She lives in someplace in mid-New Jersey, Patterson, I think, or something like that. And she's a mom. I don't think she's doing anything professionally anymore. I could be wrong.
I haven't seen anything, at least in a long time. Back to Eric and Joey. So do they even lay down the rhythm parts for that album?
Yes.
Okay. Just none of the solos.
Right. And the rhythm parts were fine. They did a great job on that stuff. And then, as I said, they took lessons from Mike. And so that when they went out on the road, they're playing their solos. And so that was why it was kind of a non sequitur that, well, wait a second, we just saw them live and the solos are all there. So what happened? And that's the story. That's what happened. What
was it like working with the drummer, Stephen Sweet?
Great. All those guys. I mean, it was all pretty easy. And I thought he did a great job.
I think he was the one with Jani the longest.
Yeah, they had a group called, what the hell? It was
Plain Jane?
Plain Jane, that was it. Those guys had been together quite a while. Stephen was kind of the quiet one, but I enjoyed working with him immensely. He was great. They were all pretty amenable to at least trying different ideas and things like that, which I tremendously appreciated. And part of the thing, at least the way that I would work with those guys, is you have to be able to take a piss at your own direction. So every now and then I'd come up with an idea and I'd say, okay, hey, look, let's try this, blah, 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 blah. And the idea absolutely sucked. And so, I would be the first one to jump in and just, take myself to task. And everybody laughed at me and poked fun of me and things like that, including me. But it sort of set the tone that when, somebody did something incredibly stupid or just came up with a horrible idea or a horrible performance, that it was pretty much open season, but in a good spirited kind of way. One thing that, were you going to say something? The only thing that we did in Warrant that was unusual was when they came back from Dirty Rotten and we were getting ready to do pre-production for Cherry Pie, and I don't know how they pulled this off, but the guys had this idea. They said, we want to do pre-production in Hawaii. Somehow they pulled it off, and we did. So we took the whole band and me and, some equipment and all this stuff and went to Honolulu. And to say that we didn't get a hell of a lot of pre-production done would be an absolute understatement. But Jani and Joey, and maybe Jerry too. Anyway, these guys were golfers, and I've never played golf come on, Bo, we're going to go play golf. We got to teach you how to play golf. And I was like, guys, I don't even know which end of the club to hold. But they coerced me into going. And just to show you exactly how bad it was we went to Kapalua, which my understanding is it's one of the top golf courses in the world. And we played around. And I was so bad that I put 26 balls in the water, which were all of my balls. And then I started using theirs. And so I had so many bad shots that only one guy in our foursome was able to finish complete. Everybody else was incomplete because they ran out of balls and he had no balls to play with, all because of me. That was one kind of weird, quirky, fun thing that happened.
One thing that I always remembered, there was like a story that I think Kip Winger had told back in the day, and I know you did those first two records and they were incredibly successful, but he had said like once people saw, that goofy guy on Beavis and Butthead wearing a Winger shirt, he said that it was almost overnight that they went from big venues to small clubs. So I'm just curious, really, how did the Warrant albums hold up during the 90s? I know Cherry Pie was released like right on 90 and of course blew up, but comparatively, how did Warrant hold up through the 90s?
Pretty well. And there was one other sort of side note to that Kip Winger notion. There was a 1-2 punch. The one punch was the Beavis Butthead guy, and the number two punch was, and you probably don't remember this, but Kip decided that he wanted to be on the cover of Playgirl magazine. And so it was those two converging universes that I think mightily contributed to the instantaneous demise of Winger.
I know you had said that Warrant blew up recently in like an Arby's commercial. Through the years, has Warrant sold well and comparatively to, say, Rat?
Yes. For the last, I'm going to say, 15 years at least, the sales for Rat and Warrant have been unbelievably consistent. And of course, there was a spike when the Arby's commercial happened, which I never actually even heard. But if there's some sort of unusual activity, a soundtrack or a commercial or a whatever, then, there'll be a little spike in the royalties. But normally it's been very consistent, surprisingly so.
What do those numbers look like when you say that they're consistent?
Okay, so I'm going to be completely honest with you. When I get my statement, and they break it down territory by territory in the entire world, and they break it down into if it was a Spotify or if it was a iTunes or whatever. And I haven't looked at one of those in 100 years. So I just cash the check and that's it.
The checks have just stayed consistent through the years?
Yeah. During a normal quarter, I get paid quarterly. During a normal quarter, they fluctuate a few thousand here and a few thousand there. But you would think after 30 years, my royalty statements would be about 14 cents.
Especially after all the streaming. I'm just wondering, did they go down after, say, 2010? Did you notice a decrease once streaming really took off, or did you see an increase?
I think I saw an increase. Back in 2010, yeah, I think I saw it tick up a little bit, and since then it's been remarkably consistent.
Did they sell pretty well? Rat and Warrant sell pretty well throughout the 90s?
Well, the most precipitous drop-off was when the Nirvana thing was at its zenith. That was when the drop-off was most noticeable. And then gradually over the years, as the grunge thing kind of wore itself out, then sales and or downloads for the 80s stuff that I was doing began to pick up. And then once it hit a certain level, it just sort of sat there. I can't tell you why. There's Sirius Radio has Hair Nation, and I turn that on occasion, and I always hear some of the records that I've worked on.
Oh, yeah. Would you mind revealing what kind of point structure you had for the Warrant album?
No, Warrant was... I got a raise on the second record. The second record was 3.5 going to 4 at gold.
And does it increase from platinum?
Yeah, and then it went up another 0.5 point at platinum. It wasn't a huge amount of percent, but don't forget records were selling for $12, $13 at the time.
Can you explain how points on an album work?
It's really simple. So the band would go in and they would negotiate with the label. Typically, just to keep the math simple, a band would get, say, 10 points. And that's 10 points out of 100. So again, keeping the math simple, if a record sold for $10 and a band was in for 10 points, that's 1/10 of the money, or $1 a record. So if they sold 1 million records after recoupment, they would get a check for $1 million.
And so then they can wheel and deal those points basically to a producer or give them out to other people if they want.
Yeah, and in certain instances, my points didn't necessarily come out of the band's money. So the band got their 10 points, and then my points came from the record company.
And then, of course, you get publishing on that record as well, still to this day, right?
Well, I get publishing on any songs that I was a writer on, but the publishing money is designated and earmarked to go to the writer and to the publisher. And in modern days, the writer and the publisher are usually one and the same. If you back up to 1 million years ago, so you have an artist, Elvis Presley, and then you have the A&R team at Sun Records or whatever the hell it was, and then the A&R team would go out and they would hire songwriters. That was not Elvis. These were professional songwriters, and they would write these songs, and the A&R guy would review them, and he'd say, wow, this one would be great for Elvis. So he, the writer, would get the writer's portion of the publishing dollar. Now I'm going to get in the weeds with this, so if you have a publishing dollar, the writer, Jani X, would get 50 cents out of that. He'd get the writer's portion of the royalty dollar. So that publishing umbrella, it's two halves. One is the writer's half, one is the publisher's half. And along the line, artists figured out, well, wait a second, I'm writing all my own material, so I'm going to get that 50 cents, and I can be my own publisher as well. That's why that writer-publisher portion started to become so important, because you can imagine when you're dealing with millions of copies and millions of performances.
A lot of money.
Via radio and TV and movies and what have you, it really starts to add up after a while. So that's why everybody started getting very clever, I guess, about how that was working, not to get too much in the weeds with it. But
oh, no. In the last interview, I had left a question out. I had read it in Bobby's book where he talked about how the Rat members voted him out of the writer portion of the 50%, but he was part of the publisher side of that 50%.
Yes.
When they're younger, they go with a publisher because a publisher helps getting them into movies and stuff like that, right?
Well, that's a yes and no. The thing is, just the terminology is confusing, because you're right. On the surface, people will go publisher. Okay, so the publisher takes it and gets it published and gets it out to the public, which is true. But there's also that peculiar split under the writer-publisher relationship, if you will.
Okay.
It is terribly confusing, even for people that have been doing this for their entire lives. It still gets a little messy.
And so when you're working with a publisher, though, the publisher gets a cut of that 50%, but you also get a cut of that?
Yes, that's a negotiation. The way that it morphed was, so like with Winger, I went to Virgin Publishing and I said, okay, I want X $100,000 for 25% of Winger's publishing. And they said, okay, and they gave me the check. And then they started immediately recouping from the publisher's share of Winger's royalty. So that's typically how it morphed into just another revenue stream for bands. And it was a really important revenue stream. For example, like before we took Winger on that first tour, they'd never played a bar. They'd never done anything. So their first job was opening for Scorpions, and we didn't have any stage equipment. We didn't have anything. We needed an infusion of cash just to be able to go out and start growing the business.
And so you get like an advance from the publisher, and that's where
Yes.
that money came from? Okay. And then until you kind of recoup that, or they recoup, then you don't really see any money again until then, right?
But that's, again, a negotiation. So in most instances, they would want to recoup at a rate of 100% until they were paid. And then whatever your pre-negotiated split was, that would be the end result after recouping the advance. So typically you wouldn't see a dime of publishing money until your whopping big advance, whatever in the hell that would be, is recaptured by the publishing company.
Right. I mean, much like a record label. They don't pay out until you've
Right.
until
I mean, everybody wants to be made whole before they start writing big checks to people.
Yeah, I always thought that was a pretty lame system with the record companies. I know they have a lot of bands that go south and aren't successful, but it almost seems like it should have been all the money kind of goes in to repay the debt. And then once the debt's repaid, then you get, your dollar or whatever. It seems so sad that it was like your little dollar royalty is what pays that giant debt off.
Well, I'll give you a scary statistic that was given to me years ago by Doug Morris. He said, guess what the percentage is of successful recording artists that pays for everybody else? And I missed it by a mile. It was 3%. So 3% of the positive recording artists cover all of the expenses and all of the other signings and all of the other bands that are unsuccessful.
Right.
So if you think about it, you only need like one Michael Jackson, one Pink Floyd, one Led Zeppelin, one etc. And they
pay for everybody.
Yeah, they carry the freight for everybody. So
and that's probably why they pushed Rat, where they'd be like, get back in the studio, because Rat would always at least produce a platinum record, which probably paid the bills, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the reason why they, every other week they've got a new Led Zeppelin repackaging, that's how they justify keeping the doors open, is by that kind of stuff. And apparently it works well enough to keep it going. So there you have it.
Do you have any idea what it equated to, like a platinum record, 1 million sales, what that equals to the label? Is it like 8 million? I mean, what does that translate to?
Well, again, it just depends on your deal. But keeping it simple, if you have 10% going to the band, and let's say, okay, again, keeping it simple, 5% going to the producer, for example, then 85 cents out of every dollar goes to the record company. And before recoupment, 100 cents out of every dollar goes to the record company.
Right.
Now, for producers, some were able to negotiate a revision on that so that the producer was going to get paid from record one no matter what. And so you weren't subject to the recoupment provisions necessarily that the band was. And that was a negotiating tool that you would use. Like when I first started, I wasn't able to command anything close to that. But then as I became more aware of the business and as I really saw, oh, this is how you do it. Okay, I get it. This is how it works. Then I would make that a negotiating point in my contract.
Do you mind telling me what you got on the first Rat record?
That was my first major label, and I do have an interesting story. You know Bruce Fairbairn, right?
Sure.
Okay, so Bruce produced my last record for me as an artist when I was in the band Shanghai. Bruce and I became very good friends, and so I picked up the phone and I called him and I said, hey, listen, I just got offered a production job and I have no idea what I should get. I don't know how to do this. I've never done it before. And so he said, go out and get 3 points and a half a point at goal. Just say that. And that's what I said, and that's what I got.